Hey guys, welcome back to Pop 6 Up Apparently I miscalculated on the chapters. Apparently like there's 20 something. I don't really care. There's more chapters for you guys. But last time the Babang got over her little phobia. And she got curious on what else does Lyra have Chris do with his hands. Because normally, originally Lyra loves his hands. Basically that's probably the main reason why she dating with him. Chris would stare at certain parts of Lyra, and she did try to flirt. So knowing that Chris thought like they were just being friendly and complimenting him. Hate that, because there was no other pony that would have actually flirted with you. Okay, alright. So, okay, I'm about to read, but I'm gonna just have some music in the background for myself because I got that ticking thing with my fan. Let's hop right into it then. What is this called again? Oh, this is part 2 of Out of the Frying Pan and Into the Fire. Part 2. Brackets, clop, brackets. Okay. I don't know why I said brackets. Whatever. Let's hop right into it. What else could his hands do? Her mind started to wonder with thoughts of what his touch might feel like elsewhere. She was really enjoying the feelings he was giving her now. But what would it feel like behind her ears or on her back? What would it feel like if he... ... Babang could feel her cheeks burning a bright blush as her thoughts drifted into more questionable territory, causing a warmth to rise in her loins. She clenched her eyes shut, trying to drown out those thoughts, but she couldn't help her curiosity. She tried to remember all those stories Lyra would so rudely tell her about Chris's hands and all the places they would go, only adding to her arousal. She bit her lip harder as visions of Lyra twitching and jerking wildly from his hands entered her mind. Lyra would coo and giggle as he traced every inch of her with his fingertips. Then she would cry out in blissful pleasure once he pushed his digits all the way into her wet and awaiting ... Babang's legs started to tremble with anticipation as her thoughts of Lyra and Chris became more explicit and detailed. She could feel herself becoming hotter, causing her to pant softly and wiggle against the warm body behind her. She had to stop thinking like that, but she couldn't help it. What if all those stories Lyra talked about were true? She couldn't stop her imagination from picturing what his hands might... Suddenly, a tingling jolt of pleasure shot through her as one of Chris's fingers slightly grazed across her sensitive and hard teat, causing her eyes to shoot open. Huh? Babang cried in surprise, clenching her legs shut, covering her breasts. Looks like Chris is already planning on it. Damn, didn't expect him to do that out of nowhere. I thought you were gonna ask for it. Chris pulled his hand back quickly. Bonnie, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to go that far. I wasn't looking. Are you okay? Babang's whole body quivered briefly. She wanted to feel that again, but was this going too far? Should they stop now? Alright. Oh, are you alright? Chris asked again, softer this time. Baba didn't know what to tell him. Could they continue now? Did she really want to? Her mind went blank and words fell to pieces in her mouth. She panted as her hind legs started to relax, revealing her most delicate parts to Chris again. All she could do was lay there and hope that he would keep going. Chris stayed motionless for a while. She was worried that she might have frightened him with her sudden reaction, but soon his hand came back down and rested on her belly. He moved it back and forth slowly, as if he was testing the waters, making sure it was okay. Babang could feel her heart beating out of her chest as she nodded her head gently, hoping that was enough for him to understand. Chris's hand started to move down, rubbing her just above where her delicate breasts rested. He was teasing her as he lingered there, just centimeters out of reach, causing her to whimper helplessly. Her hips started to shift and move on their own, seeking out his touch. His hand moved lower, making Babang gasp sharply once his hand made contact with her right breast. He held her there, cupping the small delicate mound with his firm and strong hand. Her right hind leg twitched slightly at the sensation. It was unlike anything she had felt before, and she had nothing to compare it to. Lyra would often touch her there, but it wasn't anything like this. While Lyra's hoof could only massage and rub, Chris's hand could wrap around her and hold her securely. It felt so comforting and warm. Chris gave a firm squeeze, making her press her lips together, trying to her best to not make any embarrassing noises as he manipulated her. She could feel her oversensitive nipple being pressed down by his powerful hand, causing her whole lower half to tingle with eager anticipation. She began to drip with arousal, wanting him to play with her more. His left hand slowly began making its way down her side, and she watched as it inched its way over to the other lonely, cold, and wanting teat. His fingers reached out and lightly grazed at her hard nipple, causing her to moan softly through her pursed lips. She tried desperately to hold back any more embarrassing sounds as his index finger and thumb pinched her sensitive nub, giving it a firm squeeze and a twist. Oh, sorry if I'm going too fast. I just got really passionate about this real quickly. Anyways, let's hop back into it. She arched her back and covered her lips with her hooves, suppressing another moan as she shut her eyes tightly. Her cheeks burned brightly as her pleasure shot up. She couldn't believe how much Chris was affecting her. She was putty in his hands, and she was living every single second of it. Chris started to rub her teeth between his fingertips even harder, sending her mind spinning with ecstasy and making it increasingly more difficult not to cry out. There were so many new sensations, but just when she was starting to get used to this assault, his right hand let go of her breast, only to come back and pinch her nipple tightly. He tugged it a few times, making her squeak and buck her hind legs involuntarily as sharp jolts of tingling pleasure ran through her. He then let go of both of her now tender nipples and cupped his hands over her breast before massaging and squeezing them caringly. Bonbon opened her eyes slightly and peered down between her legs. It felt wonderful having him cradle and knead her. After all the rough playing he did, she wanted his hand to stay there forever, holding her, keeping her safe in his palms. It was such a blissful sensation, and she thought she could fall asleep in his strong and powerful arms if they stayed like that. In fact, she wanted to. Before she could get too comfortable, Chris's left hand let go of her, much to her dismay, and wrapped itself around her belly, holding her securely. His other hand smoothed over both her breasts, moving from side to side. He then stopped, resting his hand between her soft mounds. Bonbon frowned in confusion as she watched his hand. She wasn't sure why he stopped all of a sudden. She wished he would go back to holding her. Eventually, she could feel his hand start to tremble against her. His breathing became heavier and his heart rate shot up. Was he scared about something? Chris's hand began to move up and down slowly, inching lower and lower. She could feel his fingertips come just centimeters away from her pulsating clit, only to retreat back. See Chris right now? Okay. Interjection point. Chris right now is testing the waters again, but he's not sure how far to go. Because you two aren't technically dating yet, I guess, or not part of a herd. Was he going to? Bonbon bit her lip hard. She could feel her manhood ache and weaken in anticipation for what Chris wanted to do, but he wasn't making a move. Was he scared? She could feel his body shudder slightly behind her, making his intentions known to her. He wanted to, but he was too nervous and uncertain to continue. It was actually kind of adorable. She felt just as nervous and shy about what he wanted to do, but she couldn't deny how much she wanted him to keep going. Chris sighed sadly and started to lift his hand away, interrupting her thoughts. Bonbon quickly placed her right hoof on top of his hand, catching him before his touch could leave her completely. "Bonnie?" Chris whispered softly. Bonbon was too shy to speak. She just held him there, lightly rubbing the top of his hand with her hoof, reassuringly. Chris stayed motionless as his hand lingered between her breasts. She could still feel him trembling a little. She used her shaky left hoof to reach out and pat his forearm up and down as she tried to vocalize her desires. Every word fell to pieces in her mouth. Her bashfulness was overwhelming her, causing her to let out a helpless whimper every time she tried to speak. Eventually, Chris leaned forward, placing his head on her mane as he inched closer to her marehood, causing her to shiver with eager excitement. She let his arm slide through her grip while his hand slid over her vulva. She spread her legs out even more for him as he cupped her. He then pressed his palm against her winking entrance while lightly patting a small spot on her thigh with his thumb. Bonbon cooed softly in approval. His warm hand felt wonderful over her aching sex, and she could feel her convulsing lips coating him in her arousal. She panted softly as her hips started to roll on their own. Chris started to move his hand up, letting his middle and ring fingers lightly brush against her wet, quivering folds. She gasped sharply and quivered slightly as his fingertips lightly traced her entrance. He started to spread her warm arousal around as he explored and teased her to no end. His touch tingled in all the best ways possible, making her clench her teeth together, trying her best to stifle her cries of pleasure. She squeezed him tighter, pressing it against her cheek as she watched. She didn't dare to let go. Chris pressed his fingers down harder on the entrance before rubbing her delicate folds in a hard but slow circular pattern. Bonbon held back a moan and splayed her ears flat. It felt so strange having him massage her like that. like that. His fingers were so precise and only added the right amount of pressure to where her body desired it the most. It was so much better than her own hoof and only aroused her more. She could feel herself becoming wetter as Chris's fingers glided around her marehood with more ease, letting him move faster and harder. The aroma of sweat and sex started to fill the room, and Baba could smell her own unnatural musk. The air was thick with it, and it made her blush brightly. There was no doubt that Chris noticed it as well, as she wanted to apologize, but her mind was too drunk with pleasure for her to think straight. She just hoped he wasn't offended by it. Chris took a deep breath through his nose, making her blush even harder. There was no doubt that he was smelling her awful and pungent feminine musk. He then hummed softly to himself and slowed his circular motions before starting to massage her up and down in a V pattern, stimulating her folds. He then moved his left arm up her chest and held her tightly as he kissed the top of her mane. Pompon whimpered in embarrassment as her hips started to move up and down with a mind of their own, working against his ministrations. After a while, Chris's fingers began to move upward until they reached her pulsating clit. He used his index and middle finger to press down on her sensitive button, making her squeak and shiver with delight. Okay, interjection time. I'm pretty sure Chris knows when a mare is in heat, and I don't think he would mind any smell. Especially if it's the mare he wants. Anyways, another water break for me. Alright, let's get back into it. Bonbon let a muffled groan as her hind legs twitched at his touch. She squeezed his arm tightly as her whole body locked up in preparation for what she hoped he was about to do. Chris pressed down firmly and started to knead her love button in fast circles. Her body shivered as waves of blissful pleasure rocketed through her, making her wiggle and arch her back against him. It was becoming increasingly more difficult to hold back her moans and screams now, but she held on as he continued to assault one of her most delicate and sensitive areas. Bonbon's mind was drowning in ecstasy, and she could feel a powerful pressure starting to build up deep within her. She couldn't believe how close she was already, but she had to hold on. It would be so humiliating if Chris saw her make a mess like that. And she could tell a big one was coming, bigger than she had ever felt before. She needed to tell him to stop before it became too much, so she could finish herself in the bathroom. Yeah, he's not gonna let you do that. Before Bonbon could say anything. Hey, what? Okay. I lost my place. Before Bonbon could say anything, Chris stopped his ministrations, much to her disappointed relief, before sliding his fingers back down to her convulsing entrance. His fingers slipped between her lips, then started to spread out, pinning her folds back as he did so. She squeaked in surprise as he exposed her most sacred spot to the harsh cold. The chilled air helped to soothe her burning marehood and to cool her impending climax, but her cheeks felt like they were on fire. She hid her face in his arms as a helpless and embarrassed, whiny, I don't know what the fuck to say, whiny, escaped her lips. There was no way Chris could see from his position, but the thought of how open she was at the moment was so shameful, but thrilling at the same time. And it was cold, so very cold. Her legs started to close together in an effort to shield herself from the harsh winter air, but it was no use. She squeezed Chris's arm tightly, trying to make her discomfort known, and as soon as she did, his fingers started to relax. She could feel herself slowly start to warm up again. Just then, Chris took his middle finger and pressed the burning hot digit up against her love tunnel, making her look back between her legs and gasp sharply in surprise. She closed her legs completely around his hand, trapping him there. His finger radiated warmth on her now overly sensitive marehood, and it felt so delightful to have his burning touch there. It was like jumping into a warm bath on a chilling day, only so much more soothing. Things got heated real quick. I don't know what else to say about this. Alright. Chris pressed the tip of his finger into her entrance, causing her whole body to stiffen, her sensitive walls clench and convulse around him as he penetrated her. She cried with a muffled moan as his finger pushed through her resistance, disappearing half of his digits inside of her until her body momentarily tightened around him, trapping him there. "Bonnie!" Chris cooed softly, tickling her ear with his warm breath. "Just relax, it's okay." He tried to move again, but her muscles were still squeezing him tightly. He kissed the top of her mane sweetly, while his left hand started to rub her belly in a comforting manner. Bonbon clung to his gentle and reassuring words. She shut her eyes and took a deep breath. took a breath through her nose. The air was still thick with her musk, but she could still smell the fire lily. Her body started to relax just enough so Chris could slowly work the rest of his way into her squeezing depths. She whimpered and pressed her forehead into his arm while her tail flicked from side to side as his entire finger disappeared inside her. Her walls clenched around the invader, wanting to take him even deeper as she groaned through her tightly pursed lips. Chris kept rubbing her belly with his left hand while he started to pull his finger out, only to work his way back in. Bob shivered as he built up a slow and steady rhythm. Over time, he started to pick up speed as his finger became slick with her essence, making it easier for the single digit to stimulate her delicate insides. She could feel her climax peaking again, and she started to pant softly against his arm. Chris pushed his finger in as far as he could go, pressing his knuckles against her hips, causing her body to quiver. He then drew back and brought his ring finger up, letting it rest next to its counterpart before pushing back in. Baba suppressed a moan as the additional digit slipped inside with little resistance. Thanks to the copious amounts of her own shameful arousal, she could feel her inner walls convulse and stretch around him in order to accept the increased girth. He pushed all the way inside and rested there, nuzzling his cheek against the top of her mane. "How are you feeling?" Chris asked in a sweet whisper. Baba could only respond with a soft whimper while stroking his forearm with her hoof lightly. Her hips started to roll into his hand, letting his fingertips rub against her rippling inner walls, desperate for his attention. Alright, Chris chuckled softly, letting his fingers feel around for a bit, making her let out muffled groans of pleasure. "Lyra loves this," he cooed, before suddenly flexing his fingers straight up. Babang gasped loudly in surprise as his fingertips grazed over a sensitive spot on the top of her inner walls, causing her back to arch up as a surge of blissful pleasure shot through her. This new feeling was confusing to her, but before she could wrap her head around the sensation, Chris started to tickle that spot with his fingertips. She screwed her eyes shut and choked his arm tightly, doing all she could do to hold back a moan. Her hind legs started to rub against each other, clapping down on his hand even harder in response to the new feeling. She never knew that spot even existed inside her. It was so intense, and feeling him touch it made her imminent climax all the more apparent. If he kept that up, she wouldn't last long at all. Without giving her much time to adjust, Chris quickly started to move his fingers in and out, making sure he kept hitting that spot as he did. Baba moaned loudly through her pursed lips as she quivered in Chris's arms, her body tightening up, trying desperately to hold back her orgasm. She pawed desperately at his forearm and shook her head into his biceps, trying hard to tell him to stop before it was too late. "Let go," Chris whispered sweetly into her ear as he continued his fast ministrations. "Let me hear that beautiful voice," he added, moving even faster. Baba did her best to hold out, but ultimately gave up. Chris," she shouted to the sky, granting his wish as her hips wiggled and rolled, trying to escape those wonderful and magical fingers of his, with little success. I'm gonna, let go for me, Bonnie," Chris cooed, pressing deeper into her twitching marehood. Baba couldn't hold any more, even if she wanted to. She was completely helpless and at his mercy. Wait. She tried one last time to tell him to stop, but couldn't as she felt herself being pushed over the edge. She buried her face against his arm, squeezing him tightly as she came and cried out. Her whole body arched up to the sky, and her hind legs stretched out onto the bed, pushing herself up. As her whole body shook with pleasure, her marehood clenched and spasmed around his fingers in earnest, while a hot gush of her liquid spilled out, drenching his hand in her warm essence. Her mind went blank as a wave after wave of pure ecstasy rolled over every inch of her body. The feeling was only amplified as Chris kept his fingertips pressed up against that sweet spot. He pressed in deeper and massaged her harder, prolonging her climax, coaxing more and more of her essence to come spurting out until she had nothing left. Her body gave one last shudder before relaxing, slowly calming down from her orgasm. She fell limp atop of Chris, panting heavily, releasing her power hold on his arm. Chris slowly withdrew his fingers from her. He then placed his hand over her bent marehood before lightly massaging it with his palm. Bobon's blink mind started to return as she regained control of her now sore limbs. It felt like she had galloped over 100 miles and was completely out of breath. Chris held her there for a while, letting her ride out her orgasm and collect herself. Excuse me. Alright, so that's enough of the heated part. Soon, Baban's mind came back into focus. The world stopped spinning, and she started to realize what she had done. No, she whimpered in a soft, shaky voice. She let things go too far, and she just came all over Chris's hand. The bed was no doubt covered in her shame as well. She felt so embarrassed. How could she let it go that far? She could have tried hard to tell Chris to stop before it was too late. How do you feel? Chris asked sweetly. Bonbon slowly rolled over onto her belly, rested on top of his. She looked back at him with a sad expression as she tried to apologize for what happened. She tried to say, but was too shy and ashamed of herself. Tears started to well in her eyes while she fought to push out the next words. Hey, what's the matter? Chris asked in worried concern. Are you okay? Did I hurt you? He asked, running his left hand through her mane and placed it on her cheek. Bonbon closed her eyes and leaned into his hand. No, she made her collect herself before speaking again. I'm sorry I let it go that far. I should have told you to stop before I came. Chris questioned raising an eyebrow. Bonbon blushed deeply and buried her face in his shirt before nodding her head. Chris laughed and held her tightly with his left hand. Bonnie, that's ridiculous. I wanted you to enjoy it. Why not Christian? Would you apologize for that? 'Cause it's embarrassing. Bonbon, okay, she has it muffled like, 'cause it's embarrassing. Bonbon mumbled into his shirt before looking back up at him, resting her chin on his chest. I didn't think it would go that far, and I do that when I'm really turned on, and then you just started to do that thing with your finger, and I just she babbled and whimpered, looking away from him, and the smile. Hey now, Chris said sweetly, using his left hand to move her now frazzled curls out of her eyes. It's really nothing to be ashamed of. That's just silly, he added with a light chuckle. I really like it when mares do that, and to be honest, all you ponies smell wonderful when you're turned on. Really? Bonbon asked, looking up at him with a raised eyebrow. She was having trouble believing that. Yeah, Chris confirmed it with a smile. I still think it's crazy how all you ponies smell like some kind of sweet candy or something when you're excited or sweating. Rotting candy, Bonbon corrected quietly. Chris took a deep breath through his nose, making Bonbon blush even harder. Don't do that, she cried, jerking her head up. It smells like fresh vanilla. It's wonderful. Oh, sweet Celestia, Bonbon whimpered, covering her blushing face behind her hooves. It smells nothing like fresh vanilla. It smells like sour vanilla. Chris laughed loudly before moving Bonbon's hooves away from her face. Well, I love it. Bonbon said, well then, you're just as weird as Lyra, and I still made a mess. Chris rolled his eyes. Don't worry about it. We can clean the sheets, and you don't need to feel embarrassed by it. I try to get Lyra to do that all the time. Honestly, it's something I really enjoy. Bonbon shook her head. You are just like Lyra, she groaned. Both of you like that. I guess I should have expected as much. Did you enjoy yourself at least? Bonbon rested her blushing cheek on his shirt. She used her hoof to rub his chest for a moment, then nodded her head against him. It was wonderful. I've never had a big one quite like that before. You know what's even better though? Chris asked happily. What? Bonbon asked, lifting her head up, looking up at him curiously. Chris wiped his right hand on the bedsheet. I can do this now, he said, lifting his now dry hand up with a soft grunt. He pinched her left ear with his thumb and index finger before rubbing it between them. Bonbon gasped in surprise and cooed in delight, letting her head lean into his hand as her eyelids fell slightly. Oh my, sweet Luna. Lyra was so right about you, she admitted in a happy moan. Chris juggled softly, then grunted in pain, letting his arm drop down to the mattress. Bonbon gave him a weird look. Are you okay? Yeah, my arm's just a little sore, he tried to reassure her. You with ponies really are strong. For a while there, I thought you were going to snap my arm in half, he teased with a light chuckle. He's teasing Bonbon. But they're probably stronger than Lyra, aka the unicorn. Bonbon's eyes widened in shock when she remembered how hard she had been squeezing him. Oh, Chris, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you like that. Chris smiled and shook his head before rubbing her back. It's okay, really. Like I said, it's just a little sore. I'm sure it'll be fine in the morning, he said softly. I'm just happy you could get over your fear. Bonbon said and let her head fall to his chest. She wrapped her forelegs around his barrel and nuzzled into him. Me too. Okay, so we got the fear out of the way, but what about Scary? Can you touch Scary? Now, that's my question. Can we do that? Bonbon, if you can do that, then you are truly over your fear. But right now, you're just over Chris. Chris is not a spider. Okay? This just got me heated up. I'll be like, if she could touch Scary, I'll be one happy little reader, I guess. Okay, let me read that paragraph again. Bonbon sighed and let her head fall to his chest again. She wrapped her forelegs around his barrel and nuzzled into him. Me too. She was happy, ecstasy even. But she still felt awful about hurting him. She sighed deeply, enjoying the warmth and closeness of Chris's body, but then she noticed something that had been there for a while, but she was too preoccupied to feel it until now. There was a hard and warm lump that was poking her stomach. Haha. She leaned into the side and looked down. Her eyes widened and her cheeks reddened once she saw the large bulge in Chris's pants. Sorry, Chris apologized. I guess it's my turn to be embarrassed. But in my defense, I was really hot, he teased lightly. Mama didn't hear what he said. She kept staring down at his what seemed to be quite large member. Her curiosity started to pique once more as she tried to guess what he looked like down there. But it was difficult to tell with the fabric in the way. She remembered Lyra saying something about it having a helmet, which only added to her curiosity. Would she even like it? Or would it look like one of those weird diamond dog ones? She remembered seeing that one looked like in an old anatomy book once, and it was strange to say the least. Bonnie, Chris called to her, trying to get her attention. Are you okay? Okay, how do you say? Oh, are you okay? I feel like that's how you said it. Chris gasped as Bob-omb placed her hoof on top of his hard erection. She rubbed it up and down, trying to feel its shape through the fabric. There didn't seem to be a middle ring or anything like that. It was difficult to picture what it could be like in her mind. She had to see it. Bonnie, Chris breathed. Bob-omb looked up to Chris with curious and almost worried eyes. Can I see it? She asked shyly. Chris blushed deeply. Please? Chris winced at her words. He had been in this position before, and just like his first time with Lyra, he found himself feeling extremely nervous. But he knew he was completely different from stallions, and was worried Bonbon wouldn't like that what he had. But if they were going to give this herd a real shot, then she had every right to see. Oh, okay, but he hesitated, his lips for a moment. Just know that it's going to look a lot different than what you're used to. This is interesting to me. I don't know why. Baba frowned slightly, but nodded her head in understanding. She sat up, pushing herself off his body. Chris moved back a bit and untied his sweatpants before moving to take them off. Wait, Baba said, interrupting him before laying down between his legs, getting closer to his crotch. She stayed there staring for a moment before speaking again. Oh, okay. Chris gave her a confused look, but shrugged it off before sliding his pants down. The hem of his pants pushed his member down, causing it to spring straight up. Much to Bonbon's surprise, she flinched back a bit as it stood proudly before her, twitching in the cold winter air. He sighed deeply, then laid back and waited for her to cast judgment down upon him. Bonbon looked at it up and down, tilting her head to the side as she studied the specimen. She started to say but hesitated, making Chris feel even more nervous. It's really big. In a good way, right? Chris asked, uncertain since she was giving him very odd and confused looks. Bulma didn't answer right away. She kept looking at him, gauging his size. The only thing she had to compare him to was Silverwing, and Chris was about the same as him, maybe a bit smaller, which was good. She was worried Chris might have been a monster, given how tall he was. Still, her experience with her ex was a painful one, and it worried her that it might be the same with Chris. That is, if they ever go that far. His shape was a different story. It had no middle ring. His tip was rounded instead of flat and pink, almost like it was wearing... that was right, Baban said quietly to herself. About what? Chris asked shyly. Baban looked up to him with a small smile. It has a pink helmet on it. Chris was blushed deep and he groaned loudly. Not you too, he whined before sighing deeply. I'm never going to hear the end of that, am I? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend. Bonbon apologized softly, noticing his annoyance. I was just surprised that Lyra was right. I didn't believe her, but it does look like... She stopped herself and she realized she was just making things worse. Sorry. And then make something up to call... Chris, come on, make something up to call, their private parts. Come on. It's fine, Chris reassured her. It's just a little embarrassing to hear it called that. He paused for a moment before speaking in. So Lyra told you all this already. Kind of, Bob admitted softly. She tells me a lot, whether I want to hear it or not. She doesn't really have a filter. Yeah, I guess you're right. I shouldn't be too surprised. So, anyways, Chris hesitated. What do you think so far? Bob blinked up at him for a few times before going back to study his erection. It wasn't anything like a diamond dog, which she was grateful for. It had almost no similarities to a normal stallion other than the girth and length of it. She kind of hoped it would have been a little more similar to a pony stallion, but there was something appealing about how unique it really was. It wasn't so different that it weirded her out, but it was just the right amount of exotic to be charming. Perhaps that wasn't the right word, but Chris was waiting for an answer. I like it. It's nice, Bob admitted, looking up at Chris with a soft smile. Nice, Chris questioned, raising a questionable eyebrow. Yeah, Bob replied awkwardly. It's different, but in a good way. Well, that's good, I guess, Chris said, and sounding uncertain. Bob sighed, knowing she wasn't helping him feel any better about the awkward situation. I'm sorry, it's hard to put into words, but I really do like it, she admitted sweetly, rubbing his wet thigh with a hoof, giving him a warm, reassuring smile. Chris smiled and chuckled a bit. Thanks, he replied simply, sounding a bit more comfortable now. Boban looked back at his still throbbing erection. It twitched and pulsed in the air, piquing her curiosity again. Her past experiences with the opposite sex were, well, she never really had any except Silver, and that was rather short-lived. This would be the first time getting to really look at a stallion up close, and she wondered what it would be like if she could hold it. She bit her bottom lip and started to fidget with herself. What? She started to ask, but hesitated, feeling way too bashful to actually ask. Would it be okay if I, touched it? Chris finished for her. Bubba smiled nervously, not daring to look directly into his eyes, as she nodded her head softly in response. Chris chuckled lightly before giving her a gentle smile and shrugged. Sure, go for it. Baba could feel her heart starting to pound in her chest again as her excitement grew. She shifted herself, getting more comfortable. As she placed both of her forelegs over Chris's thighs, she took a moment to gather his courage, rubbing the thighs gently with her hooves as she started at his length. This would be the first time she would even get to touch a stallion like this. Chris's member stood proudly in the air, just inches away from her. Demanding attention. Wait, what? Lost my place. I'm in a different mind right now. Sorry about that, guys. I just went into a different world for a quick second. Chris's member stood proudly in the air, just inches away for her, demanding attention. Her attention. She slowly moved her hooves up his thighs and let them rest just at the base of his stiff manhood for a moment. She peered up to him one last time to make sure he was still okay with this. He responded with a smile and nodded his head. This was it. Baba swallowed a lump in her throat, then grabbed onto both sides of its sizable girth, causing Chris to sigh softly. She had hardly noticed the sound he made as she stared in awe at the member between her hooves. The first thing she noticed was how amazingly warm he was. He seemed to radiate heat, but that could just be because of how cold the room was. She squeezed him a little tighter, making him gasp in surprise as his member pulsed and twitched in response. She could feel him pulsating in her hooves, beating as she gripped him tightly, like a heart, like his heart. Baba gasped as her eyes widened in shock. I can feel it, she muttered quietly in amazement. Feel what? Chris asked, sounding weak. Your heart. I can feel your heart beating. Baba half sounded in excitement, but bit her lips once she realized how loud she had been said that. She tilted her head down, hiding herself behind her curls as she peered up at him. Sorry, I've never had a chance to really touch a stallion like this before, she admitted shyly with a blush. It's kind of a new experience for me. It's okay, there's no need to apologize, Chris reassured her. I'm happy to be your first stallion to touch, he said in an unsure tone. Baba smiled and giggled nervously. I'm happy too, she replied shyly before looking back down, still feeling embarrassed by her outburst. She could still feel his heart beating, as if she was holding his very life in her hers. The harder she gripped him, the quicker and faster his heart would pound. It's just so unreal, she muttered softly under her breath. Well, you can touch me as long as you like. I don't mind, in the silence, Chris said as he shifted a little, getting more comfortable. Damn. Baba swallowed the lump that was forming in her throat. Thank you, she said awkwardly, not sure what else to say. Taking him up on his offer, she leaned in closer and started to move his length around in her hooves, turning it gently back and forth as she studied it. A soft, pleased sigh from above told her just how much Chris was enjoying himself. It was wonderful to hear him react to her touch. After a while, she gripped the back of his member with a crook of her hoof, supporting him as she used her other hoof to gently touch and rub his tender underside. He felt so smooth and soft, but solid at the same time. It was kind of thrilling to see him as hard as he was. She was causing his body to react in this way, and that thought sent him a warm shivers down her spine. Baba squeezed his base with the crook of her hoof, trying to gauge exactly how hard he was, drawing out a soft groan from Chris. He felt so amazingly stiff, so much that it looked painful. She didn't know how much about the stallion and about stallion anatomy, but she had heard that they could have painful erections if they got too excited. Does it hurt? She asked shyly, keeping her firm grip on him. A little, I guess, Chris admitted weakly. Paul could feel her excitement growing at his words. She started to slowly stroke him up and down, knowing exactly how to soothe this pain. Does that feel better? She asked in a quiet and shy whisper. Yes, Chris replied weakly, as his body gave a faint shudder. The sound of his strained voice made Bonbon quiver. He was loving the attention she was giving him. Her touch alone was enough for him to start trembling and to grow weak. It was a powerful and thrilling feeling. She started to pump faster, squeezing a little harder, trying to coax out a moan. Chris groaned in delight as he laid back a little more, becoming more relaxed. Bonnie, he breathed slowly. Bonbon smiled to herself as she watched his eyelids fall slightly, thinking she was making him feel good. It made her happy knowing she was the cause of his pleasure. She then let her sights fall back to its throbbing member and noticed something forming on the tip, causing her to slow her administration. There was a small, clear pearl of precum at the end of his crown. She wanted to get a closer look, but as soon as she moved it closer, the pearl trickled down the length of his shaft. More started to appear on his tip, causing her to freeze, contemplating as she watched. Hey, why did you stop? Chris asked between his soft pants. Baba knew about this stuff and started to remember something Lyra said a long time, something about it and how it tasted. She could feel her mouth start to salivate just a little as her thoughts about what it would be like flooded in her mind. Why did Lyra like it so much? For the most part, she had heard the stallion's semen was awful tasting, but Chris wasn't a normal stallion, so maybe he was different. Her tongue started to slowly slip out of her mouth. Wow, her body leaned forward all on its own. Maybe Lyra was right about it. Maybe she would like the taste as well. What are... Chris jumped in surprise as Bonbon pressed her smooth tongue over his sensitive tip, licking him slowly. Baba leaned back a bit and licked her lips, trying to savor his taste. There wasn't really enough for her to get a clear idea of what he was like, but she could taste a small amount of it. Well, she couldn't place it. She leaned down again and gave him another lick. This time she started at the bottom of his shaft and slowly licked upwards, lapping at the trail of precum that had trickled down his length. Chris groaned in a shaky voice as his legs quivered under her. He really liked that. Bonbon stopped her licking when she noticed how much her tongue was affecting Chris. She pulled back slightly and peered up at him. You like that, don't you? Chris panted and nodded his head dumbly. Bonbon smiled and planted a soft, delicate kiss on his tip, causing him to buck his hips up slightly in a desperate attempt to seek out more of her affection. She giggled quietly to herself at his reaction. He wanted more of her attention, and she wanted to give it to him. To please him, like he did for her, to make him call out her name. She never got a chance to do this stuff with Silver, and she had a little knowledge of what she was doing, but she was going to do her best to please him. She squeezed the base of his painfully hard length with her hooves and planted a few more gentle kisses on his crown, teasing him. She could hear Chris start to pant harder as she used her hoof to resume stroking him up and down again. Chris moaned as his member jerked in her hooves. He let his head fall back onto the headboard. While his hips started to roll on their own. Bonbon placed her elbows on his thighs, using her body weight to keep him steady as she continued to stroke him with her hoof. She then started to lick him from the base to his tip, pressing her tongue harder into his burning hot member. He tasted a little salty, much to her delighted surprise. She also loved how smooth his texture felt on her tongue, and how he would twitch in response to her ministrations. It only encouraged her to lick more. Chris's reaction was almost instantaneous. She tried to buck up again, but she didn't let him. She kept him pinned there while she held him tightly in her hoof, pressing her wet muscle into him harder. She groaned softly before looking back down at Bonbon. Panting heavily now, Bonbon started to move her head around him, licking anywhere she had it in hopes that she would find some kind of sweet spot as she coated him in her saliva. Most of Chris's reactions were more of the same, but he seemed to love it when she licked his tip. She started to focus on that area more, kissing his sensitive crown again before licking it quickly, lapping up more of his precum that had accumulated in the process. Chris groaned in delight as his hand reached out to her and placed itself on top of her mane. He held her tightly, as if telling her to keep going, never wanting her to stop. Bonbon's loins tingled with excitement. She could feel herself becoming wet again as the realization of how much she was afflicting Chris ran through her mind. It was thrilling to know she could please some pony as large as he was. It felt like he was at her mercy, like she was soothing the savage beast, bending him to her will for a moment. Well, Chris was anything but a savage beast, but he was larger than any pony in Ponyville, and intimidating. Knowing that such a powerful being like him was now putty in her hands was one of the best feelings in the world. Come on, you almost broke his arm, and you're calling him a beast. She wanted to make him feel good, to see him climax and cry out in joy like Lyra often did with her. Feeling bolder, Mama closed her lips around his tip, holding him tightly. She let her tongue flick back and forth over his crown, drawing out more delighted moans from Chris's as his whole body trembled. Chris breathed loudly as his other hand placed itself on the back of her neck. She loved feeling him hold her there, telling her all she needed to know. Mom was more than happy to oblige him. She started to descend a bit lower, taking more of him to her muzzle. She was at a loss of what to do next, but she knew that this act was called a blowjob. It had to be called that for a good reason. She closed her eyes and took in a deep breath through her nose before gently blowing into Chris's throbbing member. Oh. Blowjob. She took that literal, guys. She took that literal. Just got it. Bonnie, Chris's shaky voice called to her as his grip on her mane loosened, making her stop what she was doing so she could peer up at him. What are you doing? Mama's eyes shot open and her heart sank in her chest. Was she doing something wrong? Was Chris not enjoying himself anymore? She frowned and leaned back, letting his length flip out of her mouth. I was just, you know, giving you a blowjob, she said shyly with a bright blush. Was I doing it wrong? Did you not like it? I'm so sorry. No, I loved it. You were wonderful, but... Chris started to say but hesitated, making Bonbon feel sick to her stomach. The way he said but made her believe she wasn't doing it right, and he wasn't enjoying himself like she thought. That's not really how it works, he said with a sheepish smile. Oh no, Bonbon whimpered in embarrassment. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to make you feel good, and I thought you would like that, and Hey, it's okay, Chris reassured her, patting her cheek with the back of his hand. You were amazing, and I was loving what you were doing before. You were? Bonbon asked, looking up at him with a new hope. Chris said, it felt great, just keep doing that. Bonbon smiled briefly and nodded her head. Okay. But I've never done this with a stallion before. Is there something you like? Oh, well, Chris started to answer, rubbing the back of his neck with his left hand. I was really liking it when you used your mouth, he admitted awkwardly. Oh? Bonbon replied softly. You just do that and like, Chris said, blushing, you know. Deeply, you know, suck on it, he said shyly. Suck? Bonbon questioned. Bonbon questioned like a straw? Yeah, Chris replied awkwardly. Or like, you know, what you would do with Lyra's horn. Wait, what? Suck? Bonbon questioned. Like a straw? Yeah, Chris replied awkwardly. Or like, you know, what you would do with Lyra's horn. Bonbon blinked up in confusion before it finally hit her. Oh, Chris said loudly in understanding, looking back at his still throbbing erection. So like, she whispered before consuming him again, taking in half of his member into her mouth before suckling on him gently. Fucking Christ. Yes! Chris moaned in delight, letting his body fall back against the headboard. Oh, sweet Luna, yes. Paula smiled around his warm girth, feeling happy to hear him moan for her again. She could feel her excitement growing once more now that she knew how to really please him. His member even pulsed and twitched against the roof of her mouth as she sucked, letting her know how much she was enjoying this new treatment. It was unbelievable how good she felt having Chris in her mouth. It was nothing like a horn. There was a warmth to it that filled her so perfectly and pulsed against her tongue, making her motherhood wink in excitement. She wanted it to take in more and started to descend lower and lower. She kept going until his crown hit the back of her throat, causing her to gag and reel back. Opening her eyes slightly, she saw that she couldn't fit all of him inside her, much to her disappointment. Normally, she would be able to take all of Lyra's horn, and she knew how much Lyra loved that feeling. Maybe it worked the same for Chris, but he was way too big to fit in her mouth. Bonbon closed her eyes again and pulled back until only 1/3 of his length was in her maw. She pressed her lips around his girth tightly before suckling on him urgently, pulling his tip up into her throat. Even though she couldn't take all of him, she still wanted to pleasure him in any way possible. Chris let out a loud moan, rewarding her actions as his legs shaked and his member twitched inside her. Maybe this was a sign that he was close, but was still in the dark about stallion anatomy, but she figured it had to be close by now. He had already lasted a lot longer than Silver did, and she knew that most stallions never lasted more than a few minutes at most. Well, those are ponies, and he is a human being. He's gonna last a lot longer, to say the least. Bonbon started to double her efforts, keeping her tight seal around his girth as she slowly moved up and down his now slick, wet shaft. She kept nursing him, desperately trying to coax his seed to come out, but it never did. Trying another tactic, she started to use her tongue to massage his soft underside, pinning him against the roof of her mouth. Lyra always loved it when she used her tongue to play with her horn's ridges. Chris didn't have anything like that, but perhaps it would still feel good for her. For him. Her actions earned a loud cry of pleasure from Chris as his hands felt their way back to her mane. This was a good sign, like before. It meant he was enjoying this immensely and wanted her to keep going. But why hadn't he come yet? Mom pushed that thought out of her mind and just focused on pleasing the stallion before her. She wanted to keep enjoying this moment with him, making him quiver and throb inside her muzzle. And she started to bob her head faster, making sure to keep him pressed against the rigid roof of her mouth. His member pulsed in earnest as he slid in and out of her, tickling her. As she did so, she started to hum in delight as the pleasurable feeling of him filling her, making Chris buck his hand and hips up in response. He really liked that. Bonbon shifted a bit, placing her hooves on his thighs, pinning him there as she started to make small humming and moaning sounds around his member. Oh, Buck, Bonnie, Chris groaned as he tried to push up into her maw again, but she pressed down, keeping him in place so she could work. Hearing him call her name like that only encouraged her more. She started to twist her head as she bobbed, moving faster as more saliva accumulated in her mouth. Eventually, she had to swallow, clearing away the excess saliva and pulling at Chris's member, causing him to groan in delight. But Bonnie, I think Chris tried to say, but was cut off as she swallowed around him again, sucking him instantly. This was it. There was nothing confusing the signs now. He was about to come, and she wanted to see him at his peak. To give him his pleasure, she started to moan louder around him, moving up and down, letting his hard length sliding in and out of her tightly pressed lips. She could feel his member throb and grow inside her. He was so close, so tantalizingly close. But Bonnie, wait. Like that's damn it, my mouse's scroll wheel is messed up a bit. Okay. Bonbon wasn't going to do that. She wanted to listen and knew that what was coming. She wanted to feel him lose himself and hear more of those adorable sounds he made. There was a chance that he would taste awful, but she didn't care. She pushed down, taking as much of his length inside her maw that she could, while keeping his legs pinned. She wrapped her forelegs around his waist and clenched her eyes shut tightly before nursing on him like a starving foal desperate for milk. I can't, Chris tried to say. He closed his eyes tightly as he gripped her mane hard and his hips tried to buck. Bonbon felt his member swell inside her, making her press lips tighter around him as her body tensed in preparation for what was to come. He cried out as his whole body locked up, and he released himself for her. The first shot of his hot essence hit the back of Bonbon's throat, making her swallow instantly, and another volley came soon after in a large amount, coating the inside of her mouth. She tried to swallow again, but more came filling her maw and making her pull back to make room for it all. She could feel the warm, gooey liquid coating her tongue as it continued to come. It tasted salty, but sort of sweet at the same time. It wasn't so salty that it was offensive or disgusting. In fact, she liked it. It didn't taste bad in the slightest. She had started to relax more, knowing she could savor his seed with ease now. She kept her lips locked around him and waited until he was finished, letting his load fill her muzzle completely. Chris's body started to fall limp as the last of his climax was pumped into her mouth. He let out a long, drawn-out moan as his hands fell to her forelegs and started to rub them softly. Bonbon loved all the sounds Chris was making and how relaxed he was now. He was weak and worn out, filled with pleasure, and it was all because of her. She swallowed her mouthful in one big gulp, keeping her lips around his still hard and convulsing shaft. She didn't want to let go just yet, kept sucking on him, drawing out anything that remained inside. Chris groaned as his members started to soften in her mouth. She let him slip out before licking his deflating length, cleaning off anything she might have missed. Once she was confident he was clean, she stood up and walked over his body before laying down on top of him. She wrapped her forelegs around his barrel and laid her cheek on his chest, nuzzling into him as she hugged him tightly. The end. Damn, can't wait for next chapter because this is a 3-part chapter, which I don't really like when they do this, but I don't mind it. Anyways, guys, thank you all for watching, listening to what you guys do, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye. What's gonna be talking about?
How when you kiss another human being, you're technically making one long tunnel from butthole to butthole.
Butthole.